the CFL scooped us by dropping 9 new rule changes that they're making ahead of the 2022 season. What stands out the most to you guys?
It has to be the hash marks, man. The fact that there's been so much talk around it. John Hufnagel was a big proponent of this, the GM and president for the Calgary Stampeders, but I don't think there's been enough talk about the change in the hash marks in terms of it widening the short side of the field. If you can stay with me, that's traditionally been the shortest throw for a lot of these American quarterbacks that come up here and play when they want to rely on, because it's not near as far as what looks like that daunting throw to the wide side of the field under the old construction of the hash marks. And that's typically where you have your best receivers, your vertical threat guys, your guys that play in the boundary slot, like a Brian Burnham, like a Lucky Whitehead, like a Kenny Lawler. Those guys are the guys that play into the short side of the field because it's the shortest throw for the quarterback. Now, the thinking here is, and Hufnagel has talked about this, that instead of playing 11+1, and what people mean by that is they feel like the field side receiver, who's the furthest guy out on the line of scrimmage, and the field side cornerback, they feel like that's just a one-on-one situation that doesn't really necessarily get utilized a lot and is not brought in actively to the play. So they want that to help create more scoring, but I don't think enough thought has been put into the widening of the short side of the field and how detrimental that could have the potential to be in terms of it being that shorter throw to both your boundary slot back, your boundary wideout, and then whoever else you might have over there. We've seen teams use trips to the boundary side of the field a lot more recently, and even leaking your running back out of there in different ways as well. So I think, to me, that's the biggest one coming out of this that could change a lot of things, even the kicking game. Now, if you're a field goal kicker, you pretty much just have to hit a straight ball because the hash marks are going to be much closer in line with the uprights.
Well, boys, if you want more scoring, helping kickers is a great way to do it. Kicking, and I've run the numbers, scoring was down in 2021. But if at the end of the day, you consider that the kickers were the worst they'd been in decades, and you take into consideration that Ottawa's offense was offensive, let's just be honest. There's a reason they've changed, I think, 10 of 12 starting players on that unit. If you take that into consideration, the year was actually not really different than it has been in past years. I think the kicking and Ottawa's offense exacerbated the issues surrounding points in that. That said, I do think the CFL was smart to be proactive here. I do think this change is going to be good. Yes, I think it makes it a little bit tougher to be to produce to the boundary side, but adding more space can also make it tougher to defend the boundary side. I do think that this is going to bring about more balance to both sides of the field. So teams can't just say, hey, we're going to have a stud boundary corner and a stud boundary halfback and throw a couple of rookies who are making league minimum on the other side. Good luck trying to throw to that, massive gaping, 100-mile wide part of the field. I think this is going to bring balance. I think this is going to bring openness to the game. And I do think it's going to bring more big plays. I could be wrong. We don't know what the changes are yet, but that's what I suspect. I like all the changes. The other change I particularly like, I want to highlight 2 quarterbacks on the field at the same time. It's ridiculous to me that in past years, if you want Chris Streveler, let's say, to come in as a running back behind Zach Collaros, that Winnipeg couldn't do that. With all the athletic quarterbacks we've got now, Edmonton's obviously got a ton of them. They signed a few really athletic Americans. They just drafted Trey Ford. You've got all kinds of weapons. Caleb Evans, even Ottawa, I think he should still be involved in Ottawa's offense, even though he's not going to be the starter. 2 quarterbacks on the field at the same time. Yes, please. I'm excited about that. I hope teams use that new rule to their advantage, frankly, every bloody game, because I think that has tremendous potential to add excitement and entertaining to the CFL game.
It'll be interesting to see how that affects the way that Edmonton uses Trey Ford this upcoming season, circling back to our CFL draft conversation.
Yeah, if he's not in the NFL.
If he's not in the NFL, dunked. Okay. But the other rule that I want to highlight is the changes to the kicking game in terms of the no yards penalties and how they're now going to be 15 yards regardless of whether the ball is on the ground or caught in the air. And I didn't give this too much thought, but I think our contributor, Joel Gasson, had a fantastic article this week in which he discussed the potential for this change to affect the kicking game negatively, in the sense that it takes away any incentive for returners to catch the ball on the fly now. They can safely wait for any punt that's not perfectly to them to hit the ground, bounce, and then pick it up once it's stopped, which very few good returns end up starting that way. But now there's an incentive for them to slow down the return game in order to draw a penalty. I'm not sure that's going to positively affect the game in the way the CFL was hoping it would.
In my mind, I don't understand having 15 yards for no yards every single time. Like if there's a bouncing ball or a windy game and that football hits the ground, bounces back towards the cover team, and they get a 15-yard penalty for that, versus you could take a run and a headshot at any quarterback in the league, and that's only a 15-yard penalty. To me, that doesn't make sense. I understand that they're trying to tilt the field for the offense, and that's why they've changed the starting positions in terms of what happens after field goals and touchdowns and various scoring plays now. But I just can't comprehend how they could sit in the rules meeting and say, yeah, every no yards penalty should be 15 yards, the same type of infraction that you would get if you took a cheap shot on a quarterback or any other player on the field. Like that, to me, in and of itself, just doesn't make sense. If you're going to make no yards 15 yards every single time, then you need to at least take up that cheap shot or unnecessary roughness penalty. A lot of times is what it ends up being called. So in my mind, I don't quite understand it. I think honestly, some guys are going to get cut because of this rule, just trying to retreat from a football. And we know how windy it gets in some of the stadiums. I've been at Hamilton a number of times. It's Tim Hortons Field. It gets super windy. You're going to have guys retreating from the football. The returner is going to come up and grab it on the bounce, and a guy's going to get cut just because of the wind or an unfortunate bounce. Like, I really don't like that rule, and I would like to hear the justification for it.
I love the rule. No, I like the rule. First of all, if somebody cuts somebody because it's windy, that's on the coach or personnel person, not on the player. But I love this rule because, to me, I've always thought if I was a special teams coach, if the ball hits the ground on a punt, I would coach them. I want you to stand so close to the returner without actually touching him that you can smell his cologne. I want you to be literally an inch away from that guy so that when he touches the ball, you can tackle him. You take the 5-yard penalty. Why? Because I would happily take the 5-yard penalty and not run the risk of giving up a big return, right? The CFL has some electric returners. Don't give them an inch. So I think instituting a mandatory 15-yard penalty, which, by the way, is what it used to be a long time ago, I think it makes perfect sense. I think we're going to get more big returns. And yes, I was in the media availability when Mike O'Shea was asked about it, and he said, yeah, guess what? The ball's going to bounce backwards sometimes. And that, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he said, yeah, and that's going to suck. But at the end of the day, this rule is going to have more big returns. So I like it.